On a quiet morning at a duck farm, preparation is underway. The Cherry Valley Grower Management Handbook offers decades of knowledge distilled into practical guidance for raising healthy, productive ducks. Over 50 years of research and integrated duck farming experience form the backbone of this guide. Cherry Valley's primary commercial breed, the SM3 duck, exemplifies the modern, robust meat duck, fast-growing, feed-efficient, and yielding a high proportion of quality meat. There are two main variants, the SM3 medium maturing by about 42 days with a carcass around 2.1 kg, and the SM3 heavy growing a bit slower but efficiently through 7 weeks for a larger bird ready by about 49 days. In this narrative, we will journey through the careful steps and considerations that go into rearing these ducks from day-old hatchlings to market-ready adults. The tone is calm and instructive, guiding you through housing, feeding, health, and daily care as if exploring a well-run duck farm together. While these guidelines illustrate best practices, real farms in different climates and conditions may require some adjustment. Cherry Valley emphasizes applying fundamental principles accurately and being mindful of local regulations. The goal remains the same: to produce flocks that reach their target weights efficiently while maintaining their health and well-being. With that in mind, let's begin by preparing the duck's farm. Housing and environment. Imagine the empty growing house being made ready a week before the ducklings arrive. The floor is concrete, a solid, cleanable foundation essential for thorough sanitation. This sturdy floor, combined with proper drainage, helps keep bedding litter dry, even though ducks love splashing in water and can quickly soak their surroundings if water isn't well managed. To combat this, the design often includes a drinker island, a slightly raised, slatted platform where the waterer's drinkers are placed. Any spilled water drains through the slats instead of pooling in the litter, which keeps the bedding drier and reduces the chance of foot infections. Only high-quality plastic slats are used, so the duck's feet won't be harmed, and gentle ramps allow even tiny ducklings to climb up easily. A low fence borders the platform to contain splashes near the drinkers and prevent water from getting onto the rest of the floor. In houses that use straw or shavings on the floor, it's recommended that slatted areas like this cover no more than about 30% of the total floor space. Fully slatted floors with no litter at all are also used in some operations, especially where bedding is scarce or costly. Ducks can grow well on all slatted floors. As long as the slats are smooth and free of sharp edges, the risk of foot damage is low. Farmers report that ducks raised on good slats may even have slightly better feed conversion and cleaner plumage since they're not in contact with wet litter. Regardless of flooring type, routine maintenance of the house is vital. The electrical systems, water supply, feeders, and drinkers are checked regularly so that a failure never deprives the ducks of light water or feed. Even a short outage can slow growth or, in extreme cases, lead to losses. The caretaker also inspects the drinker platform ramps and slats, often repairing any damage or rough edges immediately before a duck's foot can be injured. Stockmanship, the human touch. Beyond the physical setup, it is the stockman, the person tending the flock, who truly determines the success of the operation. Duck farming demands diligent, observant, and compassionate stockmanship, perhaps more than any other poultry business. Each day begins at the same early hour, with the stockman moving through chores in a consistent order, feeding, inspecting the flock, refreshing bedding. always done in a calm, methodical way. Ducks thrive on routine, and they respond positively when the days are predictable. Changes in management are made gradually and gently, one thing at a time, to avoid stressing the birds. In case the primary stockman is unavailable, due to illness or a day off, a similarly qualified person steps in so the ducks never miss out on proper care. A logbook is kept to record daily observations and tasks, what time feeding was done, any health issues noticed, any adjustments to equipment or feed, and so on. This diary of the flock's life helps catch emerging problems early and ensures nothing important is overlooked. Brooding the first few days. Soon enough, a new batch of day-old ducklings arrives from the hatchery in ventilated plastic boxes. These tiny, down-covered birds may have traveled long distances and often arrive thirsty or a bit dehydrated. The stockman gently lifts each duckling out of its box and sets it into the pre-warmed brooding area, making sure every one of them finds the water and feed waiting nearby. Shallow trays of water and feed are spread around under the heat source so the ducklings can easily drink and eat within minutes of arrival. This immediate access to nourishment is critical. If all the ducklings eat and drink in the first 6 hours after placement, they get a strong start. The farm knows that any extra weight a duckling gains in its first week will pay off later. An additional gram of weight at 7 days can translate to 8 to 10 more grams at slaughter time. In other words, early gains yield big rewards. The brooding area itself is usually enclosed by a guard or ring to keep the ducklings close to their heat feed and water for the first week. Initially, about 1,000 ducklings might occupy a circular or oval space roughly 4 by 7 meters in size, surrounded by a low, half-meter, flexible wall. This corral keeps them from wandering too far while they're small. Starting on day 2, the brooder guard is expanded a little each day to give the growing ducklings more room. By day 7, the guard can be removed entirely, allowing the ducks access to the whole pen or house. This spot brooding approach creates a cozy center of warmth and security. At first, then, gradually opens up as the birds grow. Some farms instead use whole house brooding, heating a larger area and letting the ducklings roam freely from the start. Both methods can work. What's important is that the ducklings are kept warm, find their food and water easily, and are neither crowded nor lost in the space. Handling and care. As the days go by, the caretaker will occasionally need to handle the ducklings, for example, to weigh a sample of them each week, or to move some between pens if groups are being evened out. Catching ducks must be done calmly and gently. The farm uses a lightweight catching frame like a portable corral to corner a small group of ducks at a time. This frame, often made of mesh on a hinged wooden framework, creates a temporary pen so the ducks don't scatter. Inside this enclosure, the stockman can pick up ducks with minimal stress. The proper way to lift and hold a duck is important to prevent injury. A few ducklings can be scooped up by the neck. It may sound harsh, but with small ducks, it's a safe way to carry 3 or 4 at once. Alternatively, an individual duckling can be gently cupped with both hands around its body. Older, heavier ducks are also often caught by briefly grasping around their neck, which is quite strong, and then quickly supporting their body by holding under the wings. Throughout, one rule is absolute: never pick up or carry a duck by its legs. A duck's legs are not made to support its weight upside down and can be easily dislocated or broken by rough handling. To minimize stress, any necessary handling like weighing or vaccinations is done at strategic times, usually before feeding when the ducks are less full and lethargic, and in hot climates it's done during the coolest part of the day. When releasing a duck back to the floor, the stockman might lower it close to the litter or set it on a low platform and let it walk off rather than dropping it, especially for larger ducks. Health monitoring, mortality, and culling. No matter how excellent the care, a few birds in any flock may fail to thrive or may get injured. Ducks generally have higher survival rates than most other poultry, but it's normal for a small number to die or need to be humanely culled due to issues like severe lameness. The farm keeps daily records of any mortality found dead and culls sick or weak birds humanely euthanized and adjusts the flock count accordingly. If losses on any given day exceed about 0.1% of the flock, the manager treats it as a warning sign and immediately investigates the cause. Often the clues can be found by examining the birds or the facility. A common area of concern is the duck's feet and legs injuries or infections. There can indicate problems like poorly maintained drinker platforms, abrasive litter, or rough ground in outdoor areas. If a duck is limping, it will quickly lose body condition because it can't reach food and water easily, so such individuals usually need to be culled to prevent suffering. It's a hard but important part of flock management to remove birds that are failing to thrive. It not only spares them prolonged discomfort, but also protects the rest of the flock from potential disease exposure. The handbook specifically advises against using hospital pens to segregate sick ducks. Experience shows that ducks placed in such pens rarely recover, and worse, they can become a reservoir of infection that endangers the healthy ducks. Therefore, the humane practice is to cull severely ill or injured ducks as soon as possible and record the reason, for example, culled for leg injury or respiratory issue. By reviewing these records, the farm can spot patterns. Like if several ducks from the same pen were removed, that pen might get extra attention. Also, when multiple ducks are taken out of a pen at once, the feed given to the remaining ducks is adjusted so as not to overfeed the now smaller group. Ensuring uniform growth. One of the stockman's ongoing goals is to keep the flock as uniform as possible. A uniform flock, where all ducks are roughly the same size and weight, is easier to manage and tends to produce the best overall results at market. Achieving uniformity begins on day one, as mentioned. Ensuring every duckling finds feed and water quickly is step one. After that, it's about consistency and removing factors that could cause some birds to lag behind. Cleanliness is the foundation. Maintaining a high standard of hygiene means less chance of an infection knocking out a subset of the flock. Next, ample access to water is crucial. Ducklings won't grow well if they struggle to get a drink, so the water flow and the number of drinkers must meet the peak demand even as the ducks grow. Similarly, feed distribution must be uniform. Every duck should have an equal opportunity to eat, which means having enough feeder space and ensuring feed is delivered evenly. Automatic feeders are calibrated and checked so that feed trays are refilled promptly and equally. No corner of the pen should have empty feeders, while others overflow. Good litter quality is another factor. Ducks are especially susceptible to a fungal infection called aspergillosis if exposed to moldy litter, and an outbreak could set some birds back while others remain fine. Thus, using clean, dry litter for all pens helps the whole flock advance together without health disparities. Finally, part of uniformity is effective culling of unthrifty individuals. By removing birds that are very weak or ill before sending the flock to market, You avoid having a few substandard ducks dragging down the group's performance or appearance. Through diligent attention to these details, the flock grows more evenly, making management easier and outcomes more predictable. Hygiene and disease prevention. While the ducks are growing, a parallel effort is always underway to maintain a clean, disease-free environment. It starts well before the ducklings arrive. At least a week prior to placement, each house that will hold ducks is emptied of old litter and given a thorough cleaning. Workers pressure wash the floors, walls, and equipment, then apply disinfectant to kill remaining germs, sometimes even fumigating the whole building for a deep clean. In an ideal protocol, after washing but before disinfecting the farm, take swab samples from various surfaces to test that the cleaning was effective. There's no point disinfecting a dirty surface. It should be cleaned first. Once disinfected, the house is left to dry completely because moisture can dilute or carry contaminants. Everything must be bone dry by the time the new flock arrives. Special attention is given to the drinking system during clean-out. The water lines and drinker nipples or troughs are flushed with sanitizer, then thoroughly rinsed with clean water. This is to ensure no residual disinfectant chemicals remain that could accidentally poison the incoming ducklings. All of this is part of the farm's biosecurity routine, a set of measures designed to keep pathogens out. When the flock is in place, strict isolation and biosecurity measures continue. Only essential visitors are allowed near the barns, and they must follow protocol. Anyone entering a duck house should not have been around other poultry for at least 24 hours prior. They also must wear clean protective clothing and footwear provided on site, which never leaves the farm premises. Farm staff who care for the ducks avoid contact with outside birds entirely. Often employees are asked not to keep backyard chickens or pet birds, since those could carry diseases. The idea is to create a bubble around the farm that disease organisms find hard to penetrate. Inside the house, cleanliness is maintained daily. Fresh bedding is added regularly, sometimes each day, to cover damp spots and droppings, keeping the litter dry and comfortable. Although ducks love water, they do not enjoy or benefit from sitting in constantly wet litter. A wet environment predisposes them to chilling and infections, and they won't gain weight well if they're in poor condition. Thus, the caretaker is always ready with a bale of straw or a bag of shavings to spruce up the floors when needed. Ventilation is another key part of hygiene. Good airflow carries away dust, ammonia, and excess moisture from the house so the air the ducks breathe stays fresh. The ventilation fans or windows are adjusted according to the conditions as the ducks grow or as the weather changes. The airflow is tweaked to maintain air quality. The target is to keep ammonia levels below about 10 parts per million. A person can smell ammonia once it's above a certain threshold, but the farm doesn't rely on noses alone. A handheld ammonia meter can be used to monitor levels. If ammonia or humidity is creeping up, it's a sign that ventilation needs to be increased, even if it means adding a bit of heat to compensate in cold weather. Cherry Valley provides detailed ventilation recommendations for different house designs because proper ventilation is so critical to the duck's health. Another aspect of disease prevention is vaccination. Vaccination programs for ducks vary widely depending on the region and disease threats. In some areas, ducks may not require any vaccines. In others, they might be vaccinated against duck viral hepatitis E. coli or other illnesses if those are known risks. The farm develops its vaccination schedule based on local veterinary advice. All vaccines are sourced from reputable manufacturers and administered carefully, for example, via injection or in drinking water under the guidance of a vet. One complicating factor is that ducklings often receive some immunity from their mother in the egg against diseases she was vaccinated for. Since parent breeder ducks in different countries have different vaccine protocols, the level of maternal antibodies in ducklings can vary. Cherry Valley's technical service helps customers figure out what maternal immunity their ducklings might have and whether early vaccination is needed in the young duckling's life. For example, if breeder ducks were vaccinated against a certain virus, their ducklings might be protected for a few weeks after hatching. Knowing this can guide the timing of any vaccinations on the farm. Medication is used sparingly in modern duck farming. Ducks are hardy, and interestingly, they are not very susceptible to some common poultry diseases like coccidiosis or intestinal worms, so routine preventive medication for those issues is usually unnecessary. The principle is to use medication only if there is a specific diagnosed problem and always under veterinary supervision. Antibiotics in particular are used judiciously, if at all, taking into account local regulations and withdrawal periods time needed after medication before birds can be slaughtered. The preference is always to prevent disease through biosecurity and vaccination rather than treat it after the fact. Sometimes, though, things like vitamins, minerals, or electrolytes are given to the flock during stressful periods. For instance, a day before catching and transporting the ducks, a stress event, the farmer might add a vitamin electrolyte powder to the water to boost the ducks' resilience. Or, after a day of handling like weighing or vaccinations, a supplement might help them recover. Under normal conditions with good management, ducks shouldn't need continuous supplementation. These are just occasional supportive measures. Keeping the whole farm clean is also part of biosecurity. The areas around the duck houses are kept tidy and free of tall weeds. Weeds and stagnant puddles can attract wild birds or rodents, which could carry diseases. An ongoing vermin control program is in place, bait stations for rodents, regular trapping and monitoring for any signs of mice or rats. The feed storage areas are sealed to keep pests out, and any spilled feed is cleaned up quickly since it can attract pests. Wild birds are kept out of the duck houses by netting or screens on ventilation openings and by keeping doors closed whenever possible. Sparrows or starlings might try to get in to eat feed, but they also can bring diseases like salmonella or avian influenza, so the farm treats them as a serious hazard and prevents their entry. All litter and feed used are high quality. Litter should be clean and mold-free, and feed should be fresh and uncontaminated. Moldy feed or bedding can introduce toxins or spores harmful to ducks. At the entry to each barn, there are foot dips filled with disinfectant for boots and often wheel dips for any carts or vehicles to avoid bringing in germs on footwear or tires. Some farms even require staff to shower in and out of the facility and change into dedicated farm clothing and boots kept on site. Equipment like shovels, buckets, or egg trays for breeder farms is regularly cleaned and disinfected, especially if it moves between houses. Workers receive training in these biosecurity measures, and reminder signs are posted. For example, a sign might remind everyone, "Dip your boots before entry," or "No outside birds beyond this point." By ensuring every person understands the disease risks and how to mitigate them, the farm builds a culture of biosecurity vigilance. Each farm typically has a written site health plan that outlines all these practices in one place. This plan includes basic site information, address, key contact numbers, as well as specific procedures. What to do if a disease is suspected, whom to notify, which vet or lab to contact, the exact biosecurity steps to follow. For instance, all visitors must sign in and wear protective gear. How flocks are monitored, daily checks, periodic vet inspections, and the vaccination schedule, if any. It also covers sanitation procedures, clean-out steps between flocks, water sanitation routines, and, if relevant, how hatching eggs are handled and disinfected on breeder farms. Medication usage policies are described too. For example, stating that antibiotics will only be used with vet prescription and listing any required withdrawal times. Essentially, the health plan is the farm's playbook for keeping the ducks healthy. By following it closely, the farm greatly reduces the risk of a major disease outbreak, which is crucial for both the bird's welfare and the business. Space and stocking density. As our ducklings grow bigger, the amount of space they need changes. Stocking density, the number of ducks per square meter, has a big impact on the duck's performance and comfort, as well as on the farm's output. If you put too many ducks in a given space, they might compete too much for resources, get stressed, or generate more waste and heat than the house can handle. If you stock them too loosely, you're not making full use of the housing and might produce less total meat. So there is a balance to find. Business-minded managers often aim to maximize the number of ducks per house to increase production, and indeed worldwide practices range widely. In very simple setups like outdoor pens, you might see as low as 1 duck per square meter, whereas in state-of-the-art controlled environment houses with good management densities, up to 8 to 10 ducks per square meter are used. Cherry Valley's own recommendations for their straw-bedded system are around 5 to 6 ducks per square meter. At typical market age, that equates to roughly 25 kilograms of live weight per square meter of floor area. Research and experience show that if you push beyond about 6 to 7 ducks M2 under most conditions, the growth rate of individual ducks can start to suffer. For example, a study comparing densities from 4 up to 10 ducks moult found that the higher the density, the more the bird's growth was limited. Ducks at the extreme density were smaller than those given more space. However, the total meat produced per square meter did increase with density since more birds were in the space. It's a classic trade-off. Beyond an optimal point, each duck's performance drops off, and overcrowding can also lead to more health issues or downgrading of carcasses due to scratches or bruises. Moreover, higher density can raise the stakes in terms of disease. An illness can spread faster in a crowded pen. So Cherry Valley advises a moderate approach stock at a level where each duck has enough room to behave normally and reach its potential weight while still achieving good overall output. In practical terms, what does this mean at each stage of growth? Let's break it down. For day-old to 7 days of age, as mentioned earlier, farms often use brooder surrounds for spot brooding. In those brooding rings, about 47 numbered ovals, roughly 1,000 ducklings are placed, which works out to around 1 duckling per 0.028 M2, about 36 ducklings per M2, just for that first couple of days when they huddle under the heat. That might sound very high, but remember the ducklings are tiny and are confined to the heated area intentionally. As soon as they start growing, the area is expanded daily. By day 7, when the brooder guard comes off, the ducks gain access to much more space in the house. From 7 days to 18 days, the latter half of the brooding nursery phase, Cherry Valley recommends providing at least 0.1 square meters per duck. This is equivalent to 10 ducks per M2. In practice, as the ducks approach 2 weeks old, some farmers will thin them out or divide them into additional pens if needed to maintain that spacing. If a farm uses a semi-intensive system where ducks have an outdoor run during the day, they might keep a slightly higher density indoors, say still around 10 ducks per M2 inside, as long as each duck has about 0.2 meters of outdoor space available. In those systems, when weather allows and the ducks are let outside, the extra outdoor area relieves pressure on the indoor space. After about 3 weeks of age, the ducks enter the finishing stage, and by then they are much larger and require more room, especially on litter systems, to avoid wet spots and crowding. In the typical Cherry Valley straw-based house, from 18 days onward, they suggest a maximum of roughly 0.2 meter per duck. That corresponds to 5 ducks per M2. This doesn't mean the ducks are individually confined to a 0.2 meters square, they can roam, but it's an average space allocation per bird. With good ventilation and litter management, up to 5 to 6 ducks in M2 strikes a good balance of performance and welfare. Some advanced operations with perches or multiple levels or very strong climate control may try going up towards 8 to 10 ducks M2 even at finishing, but those require exceptional management. It's important to monitor the ducks closely if you notice signs of overcrowding, like persistent wet litter, lots of feather pecking, uneven growth. It might mean the stocking density is too high for the given conditions and should be eased. In summary, the ducks start off quite densely grouped when they are small and heat-dependent, then progressively get more elbow room as they grow. The density that was fine for a fluffy day-old would be impossibly tight for a hefty 6-week-old duck. Thus, successful growers adapt space and sometimes move birds into additional pens or reduce numbers per pen as needed to keep each bird comfortable through its life. Temperature control. Brooding heat. Providing the right temperature is one of the most critical jobs, especially in the brooding phase. For newly hatched ducklings, supplemental heat is a lifesaver. Adequate heating is essential in the nursery and brooder houses for day-old ducks, though it may not be needed in finishing houses except during the coldest winter weather. When preparing for a new flock, the brooders or heat lamps are typically turned on well before the ducklings arrive, often enough to get the litter warmed up to about 32 to 35 degrees Celsius in the spots directly under the heaters. The target for the environment at placement might be around 35 degrees Celsius at the focal point of heat, for example under an infrared lamp or hover, and around 27 degrees Celsius in the surrounding ambient area for day-old ducks. These temperatures mimic the comfort of being under a mother duck. The heat allows the ducklings to maintain their body temperature without burning too many calories, so they can instead use that energy for growth and immune function. There are typically 2 approaches to brooding: spot brooding and whole house space brooding. Spot brooding, which is more common, uses localized heat sources like heat lamps, brooder stoves, or radiant heaters that create a hotspot in part of the space. Ducklings can move toward the heat if they are cold or away if they feel too warm. This self-regulation is very useful because even within the same house, some ducklings might feel a bit cooler or warmer than others, and they can adjust their position individually. Whole house brooding, by contrast, attempts to keep the entire brooding chamber at a fairly uniform temperature suitable for the ducklings. This could be done with large heaters or central heating systems. The advantage of whole house heating is that it can eliminate drafts and keep all areas warm, which is particularly helpful in very cold climates or old buildings that are hard to insulate. The downside is the ducklings don't have cooler areas to retreat to if they do get too hot. Cherry Valley notes that spot brooding is the most commonly used system because it naturally provides a gradient, a comfort zone that ducklings maintain by moving closer or farther from the heat as needed. Space heating whole house doesn't allow that behavior, though it can be effective to maintain general warmth in the barn during winter. In practice, many farms use a combination localized brooders plus some background heating in the house to keep the corners from getting too cold. The duck's behavior will clearly tell the attentive stockman whether the temperature is right. If you peek into the brooder and see ducklings evenly spread out moving about casually and cheeping contentedly, the temperature is likely spot on. If the ducklings are all trying to squeeze under or very near the heat source, huddling tightly, peeping loudly, distress calls, or conversely, very quiet and still, they are probably too cold. These cold ducklings will adopt a posture to conserve heat, hunkered down, maybe nestled together, and you won't see any panting because they're not overheated. On the other hand, what does a too hot duck look like? Those ducklings will be scattered far away from the heat lamp, often to the edges of the ring trying to get cool. They may be lying down, stretched out, with wings spread or feet extended, a sort of sprawled posture to dump heat. Many will be panting open beak breathing as well. You might even notice their backs are a bit wet. That's from trying to get into the water to cool off. They will also be making very little noise and not moving much because they're essentially in heat distress. Ideally, you want to see a middle ground ducklings moving around, exploring, some resting, some eating, and roughly evenly distributed. Not all piled up or all at the fringes. Experienced stockmen spend time just observing the flock, especially in the first days, and adjusting the heat accordingly. They also use thermometers to monitor air and litter temperature as a guide, but they always ultimately ask the ducks by watching their behavior. The duration of the brooding heat depends on the ambient climate. In very warm tropical regions, extra heat might only be required for a week or so because even the nights don't get very cold. In chillier temperate or continental climates, the ducklings might need some heat support for about 3 to 4 weeks. By about 4 weeks, 28 days old, they are fully feathered and usually capable of maintaining their body temperature without help. At that point, brooders can be turned off unless there is an unusually cold snap that causes house temperatures to drop below 5 degrees. If the barn falls below 5 degrees, 40 degrees, even older ducks could suffer or pile, so a bit of heat might be turned on just to keep them comfortable. Certainly, if it ever approached 0 degrees C, freezing inside one must provide heat because at those temperatures, water lines can freeze, which would be catastrophic. No water for the ducks, and the ducks would burn a lot of feed energy just to stay warm. In fact, below about 1 degree C, freezing water becomes a real concern, and growth and feed conversion will be badly affected. Thus, in very cold climates, many finishing houses have some heating capability too, perhaps not as much as a brooder, but enough to keep the temperature above a minimum threshold and take the edge off the cold. What equipment is used for heat? Common brooding equipment includes infrared heat lamps, either bulbs or gas-powered radiant heaters, brooder stoves like a hover that radiates heat downward, or even underfloor heating in some cases. In hot countries, something as simple as a few incandescent light bulbs can suffice for brooding. For example, hanging four 60-watt bulbs about half a meter above the litter in the center of the brooder circle can provide enough warmth for a small group of ducklings. However, one must be cautious because in hot climates the ambient temperature itself might be, say, 30 degrees, so adding too much heat can easily overheat the ducklings. In those situations, farmers may turn the heaters off during the hottest part of the day and only use them at night if needed. The guideline is to achieve around 32 degrees C where the ducklings are at placement, and then let the ducklings' behavior dictate whether to dial it up or down. In cold climates, a robust heating system is critical. If the outside air is around freezing or below, the heating system has to raise the inside temperature by a large margin while still allowing some ventilation. For instance, if it's dirty outside, you might need the heaters to output enough to keep the inside around 30 degrees C in the brooding zone. So at least a plus or 30 degrees C differential while exchanging some air. Cherry Valley suggests that a combination of heating methods works best in such cases. Use big hot air heaters or furnaces to warm the overall house and prevent water from freezing, and use radiant canopy brooders to provide local hotspots for the ducklings. This dual approach ensures both the air and the floor areas where ducks sit are warm. In moderate climates, simpler setups suffice. A common recommendation is to use gas or electric radiant brooders, each providing about 5,000 kcal of heat output. Two of these brooders would typically be placed in an elliptical brooder, surround about 4 m by 7 m with 0.5 m high solid sides for every 1,000 ducklings. The surround helps concentrate the heat and block drafts, ensuring the ducklings stay within the cozy area near the brooders. It's important to have at least 2 brooders in case one fails, and also to spread heat evenly. One surround with 2 brooders per 1,000 ducks is the standard guideline. Before the ducklings arrive, the farm will set up all the brooders and run them to stabilize the temperature, often for 24 to 48 hours in advance, to warm the litter and air properly. Thermometers are placed at various points, including right under a brooder and at the edges of the brooding area to check that you have, say, 35 degrees C directly under the brooder and maybe high 20s DGC at the perimeter. When the ducklings come, everything is nice and warm for them. After placement, the stockman frequently checks both the thermometers and the ducklings' distribution, adjusting the brooder height or output as needed. Typically, the brooder temperature is gradually reduced after the first few days, following a temperature profile which might be illustrated in the handbook graph. For example, you might aim for 35 degrees C under the heat at day old, down to 30 degrees by a week old, then 25 degrees C by 2 weeks, and so on, reaching ambient by 4 weeks. The exact rate of reduction will depend on the climate and how the ducks seem. Again, behavior trumps the written schedule. If the ducks crowd the brooder at 2 weeks, you slowed down, cooling too fast. If they avoid it, you can cool quicker. While managing heat, one must not forget ventilation. It's a mistake to seal up a brooder house tight to conserve heat, but then let humidity and gases build up. From day one, a minimum ventilation needs to run, albeit gently, to supply oxygen and carry away carbon dioxide and any combustion gases from heaters. When brooders that burn gas or oil are used, they produce carbon monoxide, which is dangerous for both ducks and people. The barn should be kept well ventilated enough that carbon monoxide never accumulates beyond safe levels, which is basically close to 0, certainly under 10 ppm. Many farmers use brooders with chimneys or flues that take exhaust outside, or they just ensure that fans or vents are cracked open to let fresh air in and push stale air out, even while keeping the place warm. A small gas detector can confirm that CO levels remain safe. It's a bit of a balancing act. Too much ventilation and you chill the birds. Too little and you choke them on bad air. The rule of thumb is adequate minimum ventilation, enough to keep air quality good but not a howling draft. Cherry Valley's guidance is to use the minimum heat necessary to keep the birds comfortable. Overheating not only wastes fuel, but can cause the ducks to eat less and grow poorly. This includes providing enough space even in the brooder that any duck can find a cooler spot if it wants. If nights are colder than days, you plan for that by maybe not turning the heat down too much in late afternoon, anticipating the coming chill. Checking thermometers regularly and watching the ducks will inform these adjustments. In very large houses, some farmers partition off the brooding area with a plastic curtain to reduce the volume of air they need to heat. This can save energy, but you must ensure the partitioned zone is still getting fresh air and that the rest of the empty space in the barn doesn't become ice cold, which could radiate cold into the brooding area. If needed, a bit of background heat might be provided in the unused section too, or the curtain can be gradually moved as the ducks grow and need more space. In short, brooding is all about creating a comfortable microclimate for the ducklings, warm, dry, with clean air, and allowing them to move around. Attention to detail here pays off enormously in the duck's performance later. Once the ducks have feathered out and no longer need heat, usually by 3 to 4 weeks, this intense part of the process eases off. But other environmental factors like ventilation and lighting continue to be managed closely. Ventilation and air quality. If temperature is about keeping the ducks warm or cool, ventilation is about keeping them alive and healthy through good air. Ducks, like any animals, need oxygen and produce carbon dioxide. They also create ammonia from their droppings and moisture from breathing and from water splashing. The ventilation system's job is to supply fresh oxygen, remove excess CO2, ammonia, and moisture, and maintain a reasonable temperature. It must do all this in both winter and summer, keeping the ducks warm enough when it's cold and cooling them when it's hot. That's why ventilation goes hand in hand with heating and is a bit of an art to get right. Cherry Valley provides some concrete numbers for ventilation planning. At minimum, you should provide about 0.7 cubic meters of fresh air per kilogram of duck per hour. This is often called the minimum ventilation rate. It's the amount of air needed to keep basic air quality like oxygen and ammonia levels in check under normal conditions. This minimum is typically used in cooler weather or at night when you don't want to chill the birds but still need some air exchange. As the ducks grow, their total weight increases, so even the minimum ventilation has to increase accordingly. For instance, a flock of 5,000 ducks at 1 kilos each total. 5,000 kilos would need roughly 5,000 kilos. 0.7 equals 3,500 meters of air per hour at minimum. By the time those ducks are 3 kilos each, 15,000 kilos total for the flock, the minimum goes up to 10,500 meters/hour. Indeed, the handbook gives a table of approximate air volume needs at 1 week old, 2 to 10 G on average. 5,000 ducks need about 735 meters/h. At 4 weeks, 2.3 kilos, they need around 8,000 meters/h, and at 7 weeks, 4. 1 kilo, they require roughly 14,000 meters/h. These figures match the 0.7 M3 kJH/HR formula within rounding. The farm manager or ventilation controller will use these guidelines to set fan timers or vent openings to ensure even in cold weather some fans cycle on to provide that baseline fresh air. Now, in hot weather, you need to ventilate at a much higher rate, the maximum ventilation rate, to remove heat and keep the birds cool. Cherry Valley suggests aiming for about 10 times the minimum rate in a temperate climate for heat removal. So if minimum was 0.7 M3 KUHR, maximum might be 7 KUHR in moderate climates. In very hot tropical climates, they say you might need up to 20 times the minimum, which is 14 KUHR. These high rates are to handle conditions, say, when it's 35 degrees outside, and you have thousands of ducks generating heat inside. You need to flush that hot air out and bring cooler air, if any is available, through rapidly. Essentially, when it's hot, you want a strong breeze on the ducks to help carry away their body heat. Ducks can't sweat, so they rely on panting and on air movement to cool them. Ventilation systems can range from simple to very sophisticated. At one end, a basic naturally ventilated house might have adjustable side curtains or vents and ridge openings. The farmer manually or semi-manually adjusts these to increase airflow as needed. At the other end, a modern house might have dozens of fans, inlet vents, and a computerized controller that measures temperature, humidity, and perhaps ammonia, adjusting fan speeds and vent apertures automatically. Regardless of the technology, some core principles apply. One principle is even air distribution without drafts when drafts are undesired. For young ducklings, any incoming air should ideally be mixed with warm air before it reaches them, so that no cold air drops directly on them. This often means using deflectors or directing air along the ceiling so it blends and slows before contacting the floor. The recommendation is that air speed at the level of day-old ducks be less than about 1 meter per second. Basically, you don't want a chill wind on the babies. As the ducks grow, you can allow higher air speeds. In fact, by the finishing stage in hot weather, an airspeed up to 3 MLS, which is a noticeable breeze, is beneficial for cooling. Another principle: avoid dead zones and make sure all parts of the house get ventilation. Stale pockets of air can accumulate ammonia or CO2, so inlet placement and fan arrangement should achieve coverage of the whole floor plan. Also crucial is to prevent cold air from settling on the floor. In winter, if you just crack a vent without guiding the air, cold air will drop straight down, since cold air is heavier, and chill the ducks near the walls. To avoid this, inlets are often designed to throw air upward or at a high speed, so it reaches the center of the house near the roof and then gradually comes down after mixing with warm air. This way you ventilate without creating cold spots on the floor. In summer, mixing is less an issue. You often want to drive air directly onto the ducts for cooling, as long as it's not too extreme. For extreme heat management, many duck producers use tunnel ventilation and evaporative cooling. Tunnel ventilation turns the house into essentially a wind tunnel. Large fans on one end suck air through the length of the barn from big openings at the other end. Ducks feel a continuous breeze from one end to the other, which can really help them in hot conditions. Evaporative cooling typically involves wet pads at the air inlet. As hot outside air is drawn through the wet pads, water evaporates and cools the air, similar to how sweating cools us. This can drop the incoming air temperature by several degrees depending on humidity. Cherry Valley points out that tunnel ventilation with evaporative cooling is very effective for preventing heat stress in hot climates. Of course, these systems need to be well managed. Pads must be kept clean, and wet fans must have backup power, etc. And you have to avoid making the house too humid with the pads, or else the ducks might still overheat, because evaporation from their bodies becomes harder in humid air. The technical support team can provide advice on designing and running such systems for those who need it. Throughout the growing period, certain environmental targets are maintained for optimal health. After the brooding stage, a duck house is often kept around 15 to 25 degrees, if possible. Within that range, ducks are comfortable, not too cold, not too hot. Relative humidity is ideally between 50% and 70%. Too damp and you get wet litter and possibly more disease. Too dry and you get a lot of dust and dehydration. Oxygen should be above 19% normal. Fresh air is 21% O2, so that means don't let it get stale. Carbon dioxide from respiration should stay below 0.3%. For reference, outdoor air is about 0.04% CO2, so 0.3% is several times that. You'd reach that level if the house was really tight with minimal ventilation. Ammonia, as noted under 10 ppm, is the goal. Carbon monoxide absolutely below 10 ppm and ideally near zero, and dust levels under about 3.4 milligrams per cubic meter, which is a way to quantify not having too dusty an environment. Dust comes from feed and litter. High dust can carry pathogens and also irritate lungs. By balancing ventilation and perhaps using features like misting or air filters, the farm works to keep these parameters in the recommended band. When air quality is right, the ducks breathe easy, stay healthier, and convert their feed better. Lighting day, length and intensity. Light is an often underrated factor in poultry growth. Ducks don't have as strong a reproductive photoresponse as chickens, since we aren't trying to stimulate laying in meat ducks, but light still significantly influences their behavior and growth. Generally, giving meat ducks a long day length, lots of light hours increases the time they spend eating and moving, which tends to improve weight gain and feed efficiency. However, constant light can be stressful. Studies and field experience indicate that having some hours of darkness each day is beneficial for leg health and reduces issues like sudden death syndrome or other metabolic problems, as it gives the birds a rest period. When the ducklings first arrive, they are usually kept under almost continuous light to ensure every one of them finds feed and water and gets off to a good start. Typically, the lights might be on for 23 to 24 hours during the first 2-3 days. If there is any dark period on day 1, it's very short, maybe 30 minutes to an hour basically, just to give them a brief rest once you see they are all eating. A long day length early on reduces early mortality and promotes uniformity because no duckling gets left behind due to not finding food in the dark. After those initial days, a bit of darkness is introduced. For example, on day 4, you might give them 22 hours of light, and 2 hours of dark. On day 5, go to 21 hours light, and by about a week old, bring them to 18 hours of light and 6 hours of darkness in each 24-hour cycle. This gradual reduction mimics in a faster way the transition from near-continuous light to a more normal day-night cycle. By 1 week of age, the ducks will be on an 18L6D schedule, 18 hours light, 6 dark, which is commonly maintained then through to market. Some producers may use 20 hours light, 4 dark, or other variations, but the handbook suggests around 18 hours is a good balance. Light intensity is another important aspect. During brooding, bright light, at least 20 lux is provided so that the ducklings can easily see and are attracted to the feeders and drinkers. To put 20 lux in perspective, that's about the level of light in a brightly lit room or a bit dimmer than sunrise outdoors, enough to cast a faint shadow. In many barns, reaching 20 lux everywhere means using several 60 or 100-watt bulbs or equivalent per some area, or the guideline given is about 7 watts of incandescent light per square meter with modern LED or fluorescent lights. Far fewer watts are needed to achieve the same brightness, perhaps only 1.52 watts M2. In the very first days, the farm may increase intensity further around the feeding area, even up to 40 lux, to ensure the little ducklings are drawn to the feed and water. You can do this by hanging a couple of extra bulbs over the feed trays or simply by the fact that the heat lamps themselves often give strong light. After about a week, once all ducks are eating and drinking well, keeping a minimum of 20 lux generally is sufficient. If the lights are too dim, ducks might become less active and eat less. However, sometimes later in the growing period, if the ducks are getting overly frisky or starting to feather peck, the farmer might slightly dim the lights to calm the birds down. It's a balance. You want them active enough to eat and gain weight, but not so overactive that they injure each other or waste energy. The farm's lighting system usually consists of rows of bulbs or tubes evenly spaced to avoid dark corners. It's crucial that the lighting is uniform with no excessively bright spots or shadows that could startle the ducks or cause them to crowd in one area. Installing lights over the feeders and drinkers ensures those critical areas are well lit. Nowadays, many farms use dimmers and timers. A programmable 24-hour timer clock automatically turns lights on and off for the set day length. A dimmer can be used to simulate dawn and dusk. For instance, instead of abruptly going from light to pitch dark, at lights out time, the lights can be dimmed over 15 to 30 minutes to a night light, then switched off. Ducks respond much better to gradual changes. Sudden darkness can cause panic and piling. Cherry Valley mentions that fluorescent and LED lights are perfectly acceptable for ducks and can save a lot on electricity. These lights also tend to produce less heat, which is an advantage in hot climates but means you don't get any bonus warmth from your lighting in cold climates, unlike old incandescent bulbs which wasted a lot of energy as heat. With efficient lights, the guideline is that less than 25% of the traditional wattage is required to achieve the same illumination. For example, if you would need 1,000 watts of incandescent bulbs to light a barn, you might do it with 200–250 watts of well-placed LED fixtures. The spectrum of light color can also matter slightly. Ducks see a broad range of colors, and most standard poultry lights are fine, but extremely red or blue lighting might alter behavior. So neutral white or soft daylight-colored lights are typically used for normal growing. In summary, the lighting program for Cherry Valley ducks is nearly continuous light for the first 2 to 3 days to jumpstart intake, gradually reduced to about 18 hours, light/6 hours dark by 1 week, and maintain that through finishing. Keep the lights reasonably bright around 20 lux or a bit more early on. Use timers to ensure consistency and dimmers to avoid startling the ducks with abrupt changes. This regime ensures the ducks have plenty of time to eat and drink while also getting some rest, which is important for their development. The dark period also trains them to stay calm during nights, which can help if there is an unexpected power outage. They won't panic in darkness because they're used to some dark time each day. Water management ducks are waterfowl by nature, so it's no surprise that water management is a central theme in their care. The motto could be plenty of water, but not plenty of mess. A growing duck drinks a lot but also plays and bathes in water if given the chance. The handbook emphasizes that ducks should always have easy access to clean drinking water. In terms of quantity, allowances are made for quite high water usage because ducks waste some portion of what they're given. As a rule of thumb, each duck may use about 1.5 liters of water per day in a cool climate, up to 5 liters per day in a hot climate. The hotter it is, the more ducks will drink and also spill as they dash water over themselves to cool. All duck houses ideally have water meters on their supply lines to monitor daily consumption. By checking the meter, a farmer can tell if the flock's water intake is normal, rising, maybe due to heat stress, or falling, which could be an early sign of illness or a water supply issue. It's also useful for identifying leaks. If water use jumps unexpectedly without a reason, like not hot weather, maybe a pipe or valve is leaking. Drinker systems for ducks come in a few types, each with its management considerations. The traditional open trough drinkers are like long basins of water. Ducks can drink and dip their bills freely. The guideline given is 1 2-meter-long trough for every 250 ducks. If ducks can access both sides of the trough, that equates to roughly 13 millimeters of trough space per duck. Troughs allow ducks to submerge their nostrils and eyes, which they enjoy for cleaning, but also tend to get dirty quickly and require diligent cleaning. Many farms use automatic bell drinkers, which are round dishes with a float valve suspended just at the right height, so ducks can drink, but ideally not climb in. For a standard bell drinker of about 45 centimeter diameter, about 100 ducks per drinker is recommended. This means if you have 1,000 ducks, you'd need around 10 bell drinkers spaced out in the pen. Bell drinkers should be raised as the ducks grow, starting almost at litter level for ducklings and later hanging, so the lip is roughly at the duck's back height to minimize them splashing or stepping in it. Another common system is nipple drinkers. These are closed systems where water comes out when a duck pecks a metal nipple or a small pin cup assembly. Ducks can use nipples especially if the nipples have a little drip cup or are a high-flow design. The rule given is 1 nipple can service about 10 ducks, so a line of 100 nipples could theoretically handle 1,000 ducks. In practice, you often over-provide a bit to ensure easy access, and you need to make sure the water pressure flow is adequate, so that when many ducks drink at once, they all get enough. Nipple systems greatly reduce splashing and contamination of water, but you must manage their height, and you might need to train the ducks initially to find them tapping the nipples to show water drops, for instance. Sometimes, especially in free-range or welfare-focused operations, ducks are given access to a swimming channel or pool. The manual notes that ducks will also drink from their swimming water. Swimming water is not necessary for meat ducks, but if provided, it can stimulate natural behaviors. However, it complicates water management because that water gets dirty quickly. Regardless of the drinker type, daily maintenance is key. Drinkers are checked at least twice a day to ensure they're working properly and not flooding or running dry. If a bell drinker gets tilted or a nipple line gets airlocked, those ducks could be without water until someone notices. Similarly, a stuck valve could overflow water and soak the litter, creating a mess. Each morning and afternoon, the caretaker walks the house, specifically looking at water lines. Are the troughs filled to the right level? Do all the bells have water and the right water depth? Are nipples flowing when tapped? Are any connections leaking? Quick fixes are done on the spot. Unclogging a valve, adjusting a regulator, etc. Cleaning is also a constant chore. Open troughs and bell drinkers should be scrubbed out daily. Ducks often dabble food into the water, and algae can grow especially in warmer weather. A slimy drinker is a breeding ground for bacteria. so a brush and a disinfectant or at least fresh water rinse are used to clean them. Nipple drinkers might seem maintenance-free, but they aren't entirely. Over time, biofilm can build up inside the pipes and on the nipples, a slick layer of microbes that is hard to remove and can harbor pathogens. To combat this, farms implement a sanitation schedule for the water lines. Between flocks and sometimes during if needed, they may flush the lines with a special disinfectant that can penetrate biofilms. Some use hydrogen peroxide or other products approved for water sanitation. It's important to choose something that actually kills the bacteria within the slime layer. The manual specifically warns about biofilm and the need to control it. Additionally, during production, some farms will periodically elevate the sanitizer in drinking water slightly, like a bit of chlorine or organic acids, as a preventative measure, always being careful it doesn't affect water intake. Let's consider water management in phases much like we did for space. From day old to 7 days, ducklings find it easiest to drink from very accessible sources. If using bell drinkers, one guideline is to start with 1 bell drinker per 150 ducklings, slightly more ducks per bell than later, because the ducklings drink less individually, and also you usually provide additional drinkers like small trays in the first couple of days. This roughly equates to about 9.5 millimeters of drinking edge per duckling at the bell. With nipple drinkers, the ratio stays at 10 ducklings per nipple, even in the brooding phase. As an extra help, many farms set out chick founts or small open waterers, like those used for baby chicks for the first 48 hours. These are typically little 1-2 liter reservoirs with a pan placed on the floor so that even the tiniest, weaker duckling can find water immediately. They often add vitamins and minerals to these founts for the first 2 days to give the ducklings a boost. The guideline is about 1 chick fount per 100 ducklings. After 2 days, once you see all the ducklings are drinking from the main system bell or nipple, these supplemental drinkers are usually removed to encourage the ducks to rely on the permanent system. And also because the little founts get dirty quickly, they're labor-intensive to keep refilling and cleaning. By day 3, the ducklings should be confidently using the bell drinkers or nipples provided. From 7 to 18 days, water consumption jumps and ducks get messier with water. If using bell drinkers around a week old, the farm might reduce the ratio to about 1 bell per 100 ducks, as per the earlier guideline, to ensure ample access as their drinking speed and intake increase. The drinkers are often moved gradually to their final positions. For example, if initially bells were scattered evenly, but the final plan is to have them along the wall or on a side, you'd start inching them over day by day so the ducks naturally follow. If a drinker platform island is used, typically, ducklings aren't put on it in the first week because they may not all find it. But after about 2 weeks, or whenever it is introduced, you would carefully train them to it. The manual advises that drinkers should be moved a short distance at a time, especially when moving onto a raised platform, because it can take time for ducks to learn to climb the ramp. You don't want half the flock not finding the water on the platform. That could be disastrous. So usually you'd move 1 or 2 drinkers onto the platform while leaving others on the ground for a day. Let ducks explore, then gradually remove the ground ones. During this intermediate period, one must watch the flock's behavior closely to make sure every duck figures out where the water went. Sometimes physically herding them up the ramp a few times helps teach them. For nipple lines, height adjustment is important. As the ducks grow, nipples should be raised so that the ducks have to stretch their necks slightly up to drink. This position helps them swallow and also prevents them from dribbling too much. From 18 days to slaughter age, the ducks are drinking large volumes, and any water system issues become very obvious. A single bell drinker can be drained quickly by big ducks if the flow rate is too high or it's malfunctioning. A leak can flood an area in no time. The farm will clean all drinkers at least once daily religiously and check them twice daily, morning and evening, to ensure everything is flowing. Now, because the ducks are quite strong, any drinkers need to be secured. Bell drinkers hung at proper height and may be tethered so they don't swing too much, troughs firmly in place so they don't tip. Ducks should be able to access water easily from all sides of a drinker. For example, a trough might be against a wall, in which case only one side is accessible, so you'd count only that length. Whereas a trough down the middle of a pen gives two-sided access. For bell drinkers, they naturally allow 360 degrees access. Height of drinkers is continually adjusted so that ducks of their current height can drink comfortably but not play excessively in it. Typically, you'd set a bell drinker lip at about the height of the ducks' backs. That way they can reach with a slight stretch and drink, but they're less likely to step in it or splash as much. For nipples by finishing time, those might be overhead such that ducks reach up to peck them. If the system includes a swimming channel or pool water management, enters another level. The handbook outlines 2 ways: one, have a steady flow of fresh water through the channel, and maybe a drain at the other end so that water is continuously refreshed. In that case, you can get away with thoroughly cleaning it once a week because the flow keeps it from becoming too dirty. Or 2, if it's a still pool or tub with no fresh inflow, then it should be emptied and cleaned daily, otherwise the water will quickly become filthy with droppings and algae, posing a health risk. Many commercial meat duck farms actually do not provide open swimming water because of these logistical and hygienic challenges, but some do for welfare reasons or due to local regulations. In any event, if open water is present, it's maintained to human pool standards, drain scrub refill on a schedule to prevent disease. Good water management also means being prepared for outages. Farms usually have backup power generators because if electricity fails, wells and pumps stop and ventilation stops, a deadly combination. For water, sometimes gravity-fed backup tanks or emergency troughs of water can be placed if needed. The staff is trained that water issues, like if they walk in and hear no water running or see ducks crowding around an empty drinker, are emergencies to be fixed immediately. The ducks can survive a short time without feed, but without water, they can overheat and die very quickly, especially in warm conditions. Feeding equipment and feeding program. Nutrition drives growth, and Cherry Valley ducks have a high potential for growth that needs to be matched by their feeding program. Equally important is the equipment used to dispense that feed, which we touched on earlier. Several types of feeders can be used for ducks, tube feeders, troughs, and automatic pans being the most common. Whichever type, the goals are the same. Make sure every duck can eat enough each day and minimize waste. Ducks will shovel feed out with their bills if they can. Right when ducklings arrive, they benefit from having feed literally at their feet to teach them what food is. Supplementary feeding is done for at least the first 48 hours. The caretaker will sprinkle some starter feed on sheets of paper laid on the floor in the brooding area. You'll see tiny ducklings walking and pecking at the paper, discovering feed. They also have their main feeders available, but the paper feeding ensures that even the ones that haven't found the feeder yet are eating something. It also creates a pleasant rustling activity that encourages all the ducklings to move around and find the food. This feed on paper is refreshed several times a day, so it's always dry and palatable. If it sits too long, it can get stale or contaminated with droppings. By around day 3 or 4, once you're confident every duckling knows how to eat from the regular feeders, you can phase out the paper feeding. Tube feeders are widely used. These are the hanging bucket-like feeders with a pan at the bottom. Cherry Valley's guideline is one tube feeder with roughly a 0.95 mm circumference pan per 100 ducklings up to 14 days old. This provides approximately 9.5 mm of feeder space per duckling around the rim. It's critical during this period that these feeders never go empty. Feed should be available at all times in the nursery stage. After 2 weeks, as the ducks grow, each needs a bit more space at the feeder. From 14 days to slaughter, they recommend reducing to about 60 ducks per tube feeder. Fewer ducks per feeder means each bird effectively has more room, around 16 millimeters of space each on that feeder pan. In practice, how do you reduce ducks per feeder? It could mean adding more feeders as they grow, or if the house had extra feeders that were hung out of reach, lowering them later. On some farms, they start with feeders over capacity, e.g., they might already have enough feeders for 60 ducks each, but initially there are fewer ducks per feeder, which is fine and actually good. On others, they physically remove some feeders as ducklings to open up brooding space and then bring them back in as needed. What matters is by the time ducks are big, you don't have them all crowding a too small number of feeders. Trough feeders are long open feeders. They might be simple wooden or metal troughs or mechanized chain feeders. For the first 2 weeks, trough feeders should provide a minimum of 9.5 millimeters of linear feeder space per duckling. So if you had 1,000 ducklings, you'd need at least 9.5 meters of feeder edge accessible. That could be, for example, 5 troughs of 2 mirror each accessible from both sides, 5 by 2 MX2 sides, else 20 mm of feeding edge, which is 20 mm per duckling, above the minimum, which is fine. After 2 weeks, the recommendation given is to use an anti-waste feeder trough 2.0 mm long for every 250 ducks. 250 ducks on 2.0 our 2,000 mm of trough means 8 mm per duck on one side, but if both sides are accessible, that's effectively 16 mm per duck. This again is about that 16 mm per duck goal that came up with tube feeders. The note about an anti-waste design is important. Ducks have a notorious habit of scooping feed out of open troughs. Anti-waste feeders often have a lip or a grill that prevents the duck from swiping its bill out sideways with feed. Cherry Valley even offers a specific anti-waste feeder design. Using such feeders can save a lot on feed costs by keeping feed in the feeder and not on the floor. Pan feeders are usually part of an automated feeding line system. They are round pans that fill via an auger or chain. For pan feeders, early on you can have up to 80 ducklings per pan, depending on how the pans are distributed, e.g. 1 every few meters along the line. After 14 days, that should be cut down to 40 ducks per pan. That roughly corresponds to each duck having a segment of the pan's circumference to itself. If a pan's circumference is maybe 1 meter or 40 ducks, would each occupy about 25 millimeters of space. This is a bit more generous than the trough or tube calculation, which was 16 millimeters each, possibly because pan ducks tend to crowd a bit differently, or the feed availability is slightly different. Essentially, 40 per pan ensures no one has to wait too long to eat. Feed delivery on the farm can be either in bags or bulk. Larger farms tend to use bulk. A feed truck comes and augers feed into a silo. Smaller flocks might hand feed from bags. In either case, feed must be stored properly to keep it fresh and to avoid contamination by pests or mold. Bagged feed is kept on pallets in a cool, dry feed room. Bulk feed is kept in silos that should be waterproof and well sealed against rodents and wild birds. One pitfall in feed management is fines, dust from broken pellets. When feed is handled roughly blown with too much force into silos or conveyed in certain augers, pellets can crumble. Ducks prefer intact pellets and may leave the powdery fines, which leads to waste and imbalanced intake. So the handbook advises not to use systems that cause significant pellet breakdown. For example, long drops or hitting feed against metal can cause pellet fracture. Some modern feed systems have gentler handling or use pellet binders to keep them intact. Another critical step is to withdraw feed a few hours before processing. Typically, 6 hours before the ducks are due to be caught for slaughter, you remove their feed. This way, their digestive tract empties out a bit, which reduces fecal contamination during transport, and at the slaughter plant, a duck with a full crop or intestines could soil itself or others when stressed during catching and transport. Water is usually left available up until the time of catching, however, to keep them hydrated. So the ducks essentially go on a short fast pre-slaughter, which is well tolerated. Between flocks, just as water lines are sanitized, feeding equipment is thoroughly cleaned. Any old feed in feeders or bins is removed and disposed of, or sometimes fed to other animals if still good, but generally it's not kept. Old feed can become stale or harbor mold insects, so you don't want to leave it lying around between flocks or mix it with fresh feed for new ducklings. The manual suggests that any feed left in a silo after marketing should be immediately transferred to a neighboring flock's silo for use, or, if that's not possible, thrown out. Holding feed on the farm during downtime is risky because by the time new ducks come, that feed could be weeks old and degraded. So it's better to run feed inventory such that little remains at flock end, and what remains is either quickly used by other birds or discarded. Now, let's discuss the actual feed program, the diets themselves. Cherry Valley ducks are typically fed in phases to optimize their growth and feed use efficiency. All feed given must be high quality. A separate nutrition manual provides detailed specs, but the gist is good protein levels, proper vitamins, and no mycotoxins or spoilage. The number of feed phases, different formulations, depends on the operation's scale. In a large-scale production system, they often use a 4-stage feeding program. Starter 1 for days 0 to 9. This is a very nutrient-dense feed. Each duckling might eat about 500 kg of it over that period. Starter 2 for day 10 to 16. Grower for day 17 to 42. Finisher for day 43 to slaughter, which could be up to 49 days or more. However, if the ducks are slaughtered earlier, say at 42 days or less, which many are, especially the medium line, the finisher feed might not be needed at all. In that case, the grower feed can be fed straight through to processing. The finisher is usually a slightly lower protein, maybe higher energy feed that's cheaper. Its value is more pronounced if birds are going beyond 6 weeks and you want to save cost while maintaining growth. But for shorter cycles skipping, it simplifies things. In small-scale production, a simpler program with just 2 phases is common. Starter from 0 to 14 days. Grower from 15 days to finish. Possibly a 3-phase could be used, starter, grower, finisher. But Cherry Valley suggests that for small flocks, the benefit of extra feed changes is not worth the hassle. Why do more phases at all? It's about matching nutrition to the duck's needs. Early on, ducks need high protein, certain amino acids, etc. for development. Later, they can do with a bit less protein. If you continued to feed the super-rich starter diet all the way, the ducks would grow. Yes, but you'd be effectively oversupplying certain expensive nutrients later on, which they'd just excrete. That's wasteful and can lead to unnecessarily high feed costs and more ammonia output from excess protein. By changing the diet as they grow, you improve feed conversion. Each feed is formulated so the ducks get what they need at that stage without too much excess. Large operations, which might have hundreds of thousands of ducks, save a lot of money and see better performance by using multiple feeds. But smaller farms might not have the storage for multiple feeds, or might not use enough volume for the feed mill to justify making small batches of specialized diets. So, there's a practical consideration. In those cases, a two-phase or maybe three-phase feed program is a fine compromise. No matter how many phases, all feeds for meat ducks should be pelleted. Ducks eat pellets very well. If you only have mash-loose, unpelleted feed available, ducks will survive on it, but expect a worse feed conversion ratio. They spill a lot, they don't ingest as much, and may sort the feed. Pellets ensure each bite is balanced and also tend to reduce waste since they're easier for ducks to pick up and swallow whole. Good pellet quality is stressed, meaning the pellets shouldn't disintegrate into dust too easily, which goes back to careful feed handling. Some farmers even prefer slightly larger pellet size for ducks than for chickens, since ducks have bigger bills. Crumbles can be fed to ducklings in the first few days if pellets are too large for them to handle, but usually a 2 to 3 millimeter mini pellet starter is used. By the end of the growing period, a Cherry Valley duck might eat roughly 8 to 9 kilograms of feed in total to reach around 3.5 kilograms live weight. That yields an FCR feed conversion ratio around 2.3 to 2.5, which is quite efficient. The feed program designed feeding equipment and feed management, like preventing wastage and timely feed changes, all contribute to achieving that target. Records and monitoring. With all the elements of husbandry in place, environment, water, feed, health measures, the farm also engages in continuous monitoring through record keeping. Good records are the eyes into the flock's performance and are indispensable for troubleshooting when things don't go as expected. Cherry Valley emphasizes that you can't improve what you don't measure. By tracking key metrics, you can compare the flock's performance to breed standards or past flocks. These are the key performance indicators, KPIs, and quickly identify any shortfall. So what do they record? Every day, the staff logs mortality and culls feed consumption and often water consumption as well. Mortality and culls tell you daily loss percentage, which ideally should be very low, well under 1% per week after brooding. If one day shows an uptick, that day's notes might reveal a cause, e.g. power outage for 2 hours or handled birds for vaccination. Feed intake is measured by noting how much feed was given or remaining. In many farms, feed is delivered by an auger, and you can track how many bags or how many silo rotations were used. Knowing the feed consumed per day allows calculation of FCR later and can also indicate appetite. If feed intake drops significantly, it's a red flag of potential illness or stress. They also track body weight by weighing a sample of ducks, typically weekly. A common approach is to weigh, say, 50 ducks, often 25 males and 25 females, if a sexed flock every week on the same day. From this, they get an average weight and a sense of uniformity, how variable the weights are. The weekly weight is compared to the target growth curve provided by Cherry Valley. If at 3 weeks the ducks are supposed to average 1.5 kg and your sample averages only 1.3 kilos, you know the flock is lagging. You'd then look at possible causes. Was brooder temperature low? Did they have a disease? Or maybe feed energy was slightly off. Conversely, if they're ahead of curve, you might pat yourself on the back or check if your scales are calibrated. These growing records are often kept on a pen chart or house sheet pinned up in the barn. The stockman notes each day's feed, delivered mortalities, etc., right after doing the tasks. This allows immediate adjustments. For instance, seeing daily feed per duck. One might decide to increase the feed allowance if birds are eating everything quickly, or decrease if there's a lot left over. Also, by having the history in front of you, if something starts to go wrong, like mortality creeping up, you can see when it started and what might have changed around that time. Later, these data are consolidated. Many farms use a computer to input daily and weekly figures, and some use specialized software that can generate graphs. Graphing is strongly recommended because trends become very clear visually. For example, a graph of weight over time can show if the growth curve is flattening out too early. A graph of feed conversion can show if it's deteriorating at a certain age, maybe indicating a problem at that stage. Cherry Valley even provides standard graph templates and record cards to their customers to help maintain consistency. It's emphasized that everyone records data the same way and understands the definitions. This sounds obvious, but miscommunication can happen. For example, one worker might include culls in the mortality count while another might list them separately. If that's not clarified, you could misinterpret the records, or perhaps feed consumed is recorded differently. Some might write down feed delivered and weigh refusals, others might directly weigh what was eaten. The team needs a protocol, e.g. we record how many bags were added and assume whatever was added was eaten by end of day, unless noted otherwise. If multiple people take turns keeping records, they must all be trained to do it identically. Accuracy and consistency are what make records useful. These records serve a couple of purposes. Day to day, they help the stockman manage the flock. After the flock is marketed, the compiled records allow analysis of how it performed and comparison with other flocks or industry standards. If something went wrong, you can troubleshoot with the help of the records. Troubleshooting is part of the section title. For example, if final weight was low, records might show that feed intake dropped sharply during week 3. And maybe a note says water pump failure 6 hours or heat wave. That points to a cause, and thus what to prevent next time. Or you might notice that every time you use a certain feed batch, growth slows. That could indicate a feed quality issue to investigate. Without records, you're flying blind and reliant on memory or guesswork, which is not reliable enough in modern farming. Cherry Valley's tech service can also assist in interpreting records and suggesting improvements. They often ask farmers for their flock records to help diagnose issues or to compile a benchmark database. The phrase in the handbook is that problem solving is impossible without good information. And it's true, data-driven decisions are key to improving efficiency and duck welfare simultaneously. Summary of best practices. Let's step back and summarize the key points of Cherry Valley's grow-out management, almost like recapping a documentary we've heard. We started with how to set up the ducks' accommodation. Before the ducks arrive, the house must be thoroughly cleaned and disinfected, and once the flock is in their environment, should be kept clean, dry, and free of cold drafts. During brooding, that meant maybe using brooder guards and ensuring plenty of fresh bedding and warmth. By the finishing stage, accommodation focuses on protecting the ducks from extremes of weather, heavy rain, cold winds, or excessive heat, and continuing to provide good ventilation and a clean environment as they grow. We looked at space allowances. Crowding early on isn't an issue. As long as heat and supervision are there, you can have up to 10 ducklings per M2 in the first week without trouble. But as they grow, you must expand their area. On a straw-based system, from about 18 days onward, giving around 0.2 mesh hours per duck is recommended. That works out to roughly 5 ducks M2. If the housing design is very good, maybe slatted floors or high ventilation capacity, you might manage up to 8-10 per M2 even later. But 0.2 M0s each is a safer guideline for general conditions. Adequate space correlates to better growth and fewer leg problems. For brooding heat, the takeaway was to start at a high temperature, approx 35 degrees at the heat source, with about 27 degrees C background for day-old ducklings, and then taper that off over about 4 weeks until no supplemental heat is needed. By 28 days, ideally, you're at ambient temperature. Once the ducks have grown feathers, you normally do not heat them unless it's extremely cold. A rule of thumb given was to only provide heat if the house temperature drops below 5 degrees Celsius in the finishing stage. That ensures you're not wasting energy and the ducks are comfortable in the natural climate. Ventilation in the brooding phase means keeping the air fresh but gentle, no drafts on the ducklings. In the finishing phase, it means providing plenty of fresh air at all times to avoid ammonia and heat buildup. So, ventilation goes from minimal but adequate in early days to often maximal in later days. The principle of avoiding drafts remains even in finishing. You wouldn't want a howling cold wind through the house, but you do want good air exchange. For drinking equipment, the summary noted numbers during brooding about 1 bell drinker per 100 ducks up to 2 weeks, which was 9.5 milliliter perimeter per duck, and perhaps 1 small chick drinker per 100 in the first couple of days. If using nipples, about 10 ducklings per nipple. By the time they're older, you ensure about 16 milliliter of drinking space per duck if using open water troughs or bells. That figure came from 16 milliliter per duck at finishing, which matches the 1 trough per 250 ducks with both sides, or 1 bell per 100 ducks guideline. And if using nipples, it stays 10 ducks per nipple, even as adults. The limiting factor with nipples is flow rate more than space. For feeding equipment similarly early on, you need extra help, supplementary feeders at day old, like feed on paper, to jumpstart feeding. You might have 1 tube feeder per 100 ducklings, initially, 9.5 millimeter each. Then gradually transition to the permanent feeders. For example, one could switch to using 1 2.0 millimeter trough per 250 ducks, which is 16 millimeter per duck as they grow. If using pans, the summary lists 40 ducks per feeder pan in finishing, which again is consistent with earlier details. Essentially, by the end, you want at least 16 millimeter of feeder space per bird on linear feeders, or no more than 40 per pan, etc. The feed itself is given in phases in an ideal scheme. Starter 1 from 0 to 9 days, Starter 2 from 10 to 17 days, Grower from 18 to 42 days, Finisher 43 days to slaughter. That's 4 feeds covering nursery to finish. In practice, smaller farms might do starter and then grower finisher, but these phases ensure the duck always gets an age-appropriate diet. The summary reminds us that if slaughter is earlier, you adjust accordingly, likely skip finisher if before 6 weeks. We also recall that feed should be pelleted and high quality as noted earlier. The lighting schedule gleaned from the summary start, with 23 hours of bright light, then reduced to 18 hours by 1 week old at 20 lux intensity, then maintain 18 hours light at 20 lux through finishing. This gives the ducks enough time to eat and some darkness to rest daily. For litter, the summary highlights regular maintenance in brooding nursery. You spread clean litter as needed. That might mean every couple of days if things get damp. In finishing, it's basically a daily task: spread clean litter daily to maintain conditions. The idea is to never let the litter get sodden. Frequent top-ups keep the surface dry and clean for the duck's feet and plumage. The records we talked about are also in the summary every day. Record mortality culls feed. Every week record live weight. That applies to both brooding and finishing. It's a continuous process from day one to market. It ensures if anything changes, you know about it. Finally, the general good practices. Before you even get the ducklings, thoroughly clean each house and make any necessary preparations or treatments. That could include disinfecting, drying, perhaps spraying for insects if needed, setting up equipment. All done before the ducks arrive. And during the flock's growth, if you notice any slump in performance like feed intake drop or weight gain slow down or a rise in mortality, investigate immediately. Don't wait a week to see if it gets worse. By then you might have missed a chance to fix it. Maybe it's a waterline blockage or a disease symptom. Quick action can save the flock from serious loss. So the general ethos is prepare well and respond quickly to issues. With those key points covered, a farmer following this program is well equipped to raise a healthy, efficient flock of Cherry Valley ducks. Each component, housing, heat, ventilation, water feed, and monitoring, works together to provide what the ducks need when they need it. Glossary of terms. Throughout this narrative, several technical terms and abbreviations were used. Let's clarify a few of them as a review. Day old. In the context of rearing, day old refers to ducklings on the day they hatch or arrive at the farm. It can be a bit confusing because if ducklings arrive in the morning, that might be counted as day 0 and the next day is day 1. Essentially, a duckling is considered 1 day old 24 hours after hatching. Many farms consider the day of placement as day 0 and the next day as day 1 to avoid confusion with partial days. Production week 1. This term is about record keeping. Instead of using calendar weeks, some farms label weeks by the bird's age. Often the partial first week from placement to the next Sunday, for example, is called week 0. Then, once the ducklings have lived a full 7 days, they enter production week 1. This way, week 1 corresponds to the period when the birds are 7 to 14 days old, week 2 when they are 14, 21 days old, etc., which can be easier to track. Point of lay Powell. This term mostly applies to breeder ducks or layer ducks, not to meat ducks. It denotes the stage when a young female duck, a breeder hen, is about to start laying eggs. At Cherry Valley, the point of lay is considered reached at around 24 weeks, 168 days of age for breeding stock. At that point, the rearing phase is complete and the bird enters the production egg-laying phase. Meat ducks never reach Powell in their lifespan on farm, since they are processed much earlier. Fertility. In the context of breeding, not something a grower farm usually deals with, but good to know, fertility is the percentage of eggs laid that are fertile. It's determined by candling eggs or breaking them out to see if an embryo started developing. For example, 95% fertility means 95 out of 100 eggs had an embryo. Candling. This is the process of shining a bright light through incubating eggs to check for development. It's typically done around day 10 of incubation for duck eggs. Clear light passes through indicates no embryo either infertile or early dead, whereas a dark shadow with veins indicates a growing embryo. Candling lets hatchery workers remove infertile or non-developing eggs, often called clears, so they don't incubate them further. Placing eggs in an incubator to start the incubation process. For example, if a hatchery sets 10,000 eggs, that means they loaded 10,000 eggs into the incubators at the beginning of the cycle. Hatch of set HOS, the percentage of eggs hatched out of the total eggs set in the incubator. If you set 100 eggs and 80 ducklings hatch, the HOS is 80%. It's a basic measure of hatch success that doesn't account for why some eggs didn't hatch. Hatch of fertile HOF, the percentage of fertile eggs that hatched. To compute this, you exclude the infertile eggs. Say out of 100 set eggs, 90 were fertile and 80 hatched. Then HOF equals 80's 90 equals 88.9%. This measure isolates the efficiency of incubation and hatching process from the fertility issue. Hatch of transfer. Hot. Often in multi-stage incubation, eggs are moved from a setter to a hatcher a few days before hatching in ducks, typically at day 25. Hot is the percentage of eggs that hatched out of those that were transferred to the hatcher. If some embryos died before transfer or eggs were removed at candling, hot can provide insight into late incubation success. For instance, if 85 eggs were transferred and 80 hatched, hot gives 94.1%. Transfer. The act of moving incubating eggs from the setter the machine used for the first part of incubation, often with turning trays to the hatcher, where eggs hatch out, usually stationary baskets. This is done around day 24 to 25 for duck eggs, since they hatch around day 28. At transfer, eggs might be vaccinated in ovo for some species or simply moved and spread out for hatching. That kind of the take-off hatchery term for the process of removing the newly hatched ducklings from the hatcher, checking their quality, and packing them for delivery to farms. Take-off day is hatch day, when all the fluffy ducklings are taken out. Feed Conversion Ratio, FCR. A key performance indicator in meat production. FCR is the amount of feed consumed per unit of weight gained. For example, an FCR of 2.5 means the ducks ate 2.5 kilos of feed for every 1 kilo of body weight they put on. Lower is better, more efficient. Cherry Valley ducks under good management have excellent FCR, often around 2.2 to 2.6 by market age, depending on many factors. Average Daily Gain ADG. Another performance metric. ADG is how much weight on average each duck gains per day over a given period. If a duck gains 2,800 pounds over 42 days, the ADG is 66.7 giga a day. Typically, ADG is higher in the early phase. They might gain 30 joules day in the first week and much more later, around 70 to 80 joules day toward the end for Cherry Valley. It's useful for comparing growth rates. A dip in ADG might signal something went wrong during that period. By understanding these terms, a farmer or farm manager can better interpret flock data and communicate with technical advisors or veterinarians. They are essentially the vocabulary of modern poultry production. We have now traversed the full landscape of the Cherry Valley duck growing process, from setting up the empty house to sending a finished flock to market, and finally reflecting on the outcomes and metrics. Managing a successful duck flock is a bit like conducting an orchestra. Numerous elements, temperature, air, water, feed, health, must all be in harmony. When done right, the results are impressive: rapid growth, efficient, feed use, healthy ducks, and a high-quality product. Cherry Valley's recommendations are based on decades of research and real-world experience around the globe, and they demonstrate that small details, like how you adjust a brooder or how often you top up litter, can make a big difference. As we close, imagine standing at the end of a production cycle. The barns are clean and quiet again after the ducks have been sent to market. You review the records. Mortality was low, growth rate hit the target feed. Conversion was on point. This success was no accident. It was the culmination of careful planning, daily hard work, and attentive care. From the moment the day-old ducklings arrived and had their first drink of water to the final day, when market-weight ducks were loaded onto the truck, each step followed a plan designed to meet the ducks' needs and optimize performance. We emphasized prevention, cleanliness, biosecurity, good brooding practices so that problems rarely got a foothold. And when challenges arose, we responded promptly, adjusting the environment, culling a sick bird, or consulting a vet as needed to keep the flock on track. This narrative has been like a guided tour through a well-run duck farm. I hope it has painted a clear picture of the daily rhythms and responsibilities of duck husbandry. The tone was calm and educational, just as one might hear in a documentary voiceover while driving through the countryside. By following the principles laid out here, providing a good environment, mindful feeding and watering, and close observation, a farmer can ensure that their Cherry Valley ducks thrive, yielding the maximum of first-quality meat at least cost, as the handbook says, and doing so in a way that maintains flock health and welfare. Thank you for listening to this comprehensive guide. If you happen to find yourself on a duck farm one day, you'll know exactly what it takes to grow those flocks successfully. Goodbye and good farming.